Hey, welcome to Creative Block. We're your host, Gene.
And V, we interview people in creative industries about their life, work, and hobbies while we doodle jam.
We ask people on Twitter if they have specific topics they want us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts.
And today with us, we have...
I'm going to take a crack at this. Dani Michaeli.
Perfect.
Yes!
Woo!
Great. A fellow Jew.
Yeah, beautiful Jewish pronunciation.
Yeah, you got to get the ch in there. Dani, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I've listened to many episodes, and I love the show.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate this.
Well, it's our pleasure, too. You and I have been friends for quite a while. For context, those who know my work, Dani was my writing partner on the development for Planet Panic. And
it was my honor.
It was a great partnership. I really enjoyed working with you on it. It's sad that we never got to see the light of day, but maybe someday we'll see. Never say never in this weird industry.
I feel like it will happen.
We'll get back to that. We'll get to that eventually. So you've had a very long career writing. You most recently worked as a supervising producer. Is that right?
Yeah, I was supervising producer on a show that's going to be on Apple Plus, and it's a TV show version of the webcomic Strange Planet.
Yeah. Keep an eye out for that whenever it actually comes out. But take us back to young Dani, and how did you get your start writing?
So how did I get my start writing? Well, professionally, I don't want to go back too far.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, I am willing to. We can do early days, childhood Dani. But I think what you're asking is more like professionally. So,
wherever you feel like your journey starts, everyone has a different answer.
Yeah. Well, okay. It probably really started when I was a kid. I was a ventriloquist for a couple of years.
Okay, this is good.
That is cool.
I never told you about that?
No.
I've never heard anyone be a ventriloquist before in real life, so I'm very excited.
I was at 11, and it started because my best friend got a ventriloquist dummy. Back then I would call it a ventriloquist figure.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the D word.
Interesting.
Oh, like an action figure. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so he got one from the Sears catalog, and so I got one too, so that we could have a common activity, so we could do it together. And we would pretend that we were ventriloquists, like professionally, and we didn't like get excited about learning it. But when we'd get together with the ventriloquist figures, we'd pretend we were like, entertainers or on a cruise ship or something like that.
I love this so much.
This is great.
This is great.
My buddy never really got like that serious about learning how to do it. But the figure came with instructions on how to become a ventriloquist, and I took some books out of the library, and we also started like listening to records from ventriloquists, and anytime one was on TV, we would see if we could, if it would time out well to watch the performance and stuff. But so I did get really serious about trying to learn how not to move my lips while I was talking and all that stuff. And I got pretty good at it, at least for an 11-year-old. I don't know
Sure.
how good I was as a ventriloquist actually, but anybody who was either an adult or a kid at that time, again, it could have just been my age. People were really into it, really excited about it. So I wound up doing a lot of birthday parties.
This is such a fascinating origin. I just nobody talks about being a ventriloquist. None of our guests have been like, yeah, I was a ventriloquist. That's very unique.
There could be a reason. There's some shame associated at different points in my life, but I got like pretty far with it, as far as like local. I grew up in Rochester, New York, so
Mhm.
I did some big talent shows. I won a couple talent shows, and big for Rochester. And I got on local television as well.
Wow.
There was a guy who did a show where mostly you just watched kids playing Atari and cartoons. Those were the two things. He was the host, and his name, like on screen, was Ranger Bob, and he did the Ranger Bob Buckaroo Club. And he, at some point, realized he could have kids on doing, quote unquote talent. So I was on the Ranger Bob Buckaroo Club. This would have been in the very early '80s. Could have been 1980 or 81. And so we didn't have DVRs naturally, or
Yeah.
there was no streaming, and most people didn't even have VCRs yet. But my dad's roommate had one, and so he taped me on the Ranger Bob Buckaroo Club. And so there was a videotape that existed of me performing as a ventriloquist, but after I watched it, he figured that, like, okay, he saw himself on television, like that's what he thought the point of taping it was, so that I could see it.
Interesting.
And then after that he was like, okay, so he saw it, so I could keep using this tape for other stuff. And I think he taped it over with an episode of Charlie's Angels.
Now,
So
do you wish you had that still?
I really do wish I had that tape.
Yeah.
There's some pictures, but that's not the same thing naturally.
Isn't it
That's
funny?
really cool though.
That-
Like, did you write your own bits? Like, how did you come up with your material? Because like you had to do so much. You were doing the birthday parties and then you went all the way to TV. So like
I was really not writing at that time.
Right.
This is why I kind of brought it up, because that was like the origin of the writing started with not writing. and it there was a lesson that I learned from it, because I was getting all my material from the back of like the how-to books, or I would crib jokes from other ventriloquists performances. I don't think I came up with a single joke on my own. I could improv a little bit with my ventriloquist figure, but I didn't like it. I hated doing that because I always wanted to be prepared. That was my big focus. But then I went to Vent Haven, Kentucky, it's not always called Vent Haven. It's a town that turns into a ventriloquist town one weekend a year when they have the ventriloquist convention. And so I went to the ventriloquist convention, which was amazing. But at the end of it, everybody performs. And I thought, at this point, I was 12. I thought I really had the edge, because, just being a kid doing it, I thought was enough. But it turns out, two things. One, actual adult professional ventriloquists, for the most part, aren't, or at least they weren't in 1980, like super supportive, warm, loving people. I think maybe that's changed.
Yeah.
Maybe the community is different now, but at the time they were really like, ugh, what's this kid doing here?
Vicious. Gatekeeping ventriloquists.
So I went up on stage. And then another thing happened, which was there was another kid at the convention, and he went on before me. He was 1 year younger than me, therefore cuter. And he had a custom built ventriloquist figure. So it had a lot more articulation, and he had really mastered it. So really looked like it was coming to life. Meanwhile, I was shaking around my Sears dummy,
Right.
And he had written his own material, whereas mine was all canned. And he crushed it. He went on it in front of me. He was like loud, commanding, and snappy with the jokes, and they loved him. And then I went on, and I seemed to lose my breath. I had my first experience of stage fright. My jokes, they had heard them all before. I didn't make it all the way through and started crying on stage.
Oh no!
No! Oh my god! Wow!
What a story.
Yeah, so I think I I think after that, I was realizing like I don't know if it was a direct thought, but like I figured like I should never not write my own material at
Interesting.
least. Yeah.
Mm.
So I think that was part of also I liked writing short stories a lot
Mm.
when I was a little kid. I remember writing one short story about getting the ability to breathe fire and torching the school, which is a good thing that
You're the
it
kid
was.
that people are supposed to look out for, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good thing that I did that in the 80s, because if I had done
Right.
that
Nobody.
like
Yeah.
any later, there
That would
probably would have been consequences.
not be as good.
Yeah.
Interesting. So let's fast forward a little bit. Where did you go to college?
I went to film school at SUNY Purchase State University. And I think going to film school actually helped. Like I didn't target animation. That wasn't my focus. I didn't even know you could have a career in animation. The first time I found out that there were animation writers, I was talking to a guy who later became a colleague on a show.
Hmm.
But I won't reveal his name because I asked him, "Do you think if I could do that kind of work?" Like he said no.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Once
So
again, gatekeeping. Man, what is with people?
well, that's what I love about the generations that have come after. I'm Generation X.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really love about the generations that have followed is there is much less gatekeeping. When I came to this, I think it was no accident that I didn't know for a long time that it was a possible career.
Oh, I see.
I
Okay.
think
Yeah, yeah.
people were just secretive and wouldn't really share information. Like I knew TV writers, and they'd be very cagey about what they really did. It took a long time to sort of like, get to a place where somebody would, you know, really let me know what it was about. Or it wasn't even until I was on Spongebob that I got kind of like a opportunity to see what it was like for a TV writer on a set. I had set experience because after film school, I did all kinds of crazy jobs, including working on sets.
Mm.
But yeah, I really did sort of like stumble into an animation writing. But I think where the film school really helped was I was always inspired to think visually. That's always
Mm-hmm.
been kind of a big thing for me. I read a lot of comic books, and I loved movies and loved animation my whole life. So um uh even though I also enjoyed television very much, I think I was really drawn to the visual storytelling aspects that were up until more recently probably seen more strongly in other mediums than TV. Um, and film being a big one. We really
Sure.
concentrated on that kind of like, visual storytelling, that as an approach versus dialogue. Like, what can you really do with the image?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't. I mean, we've heard it from a lot of people that like there was just not a lot of access to the knowledge, even that animation is a possible career.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
like, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think it kind of comes with like new crafts. Every time there's like a new craft and people kind of get, because animation's pretty recent, at least
That's
TV
true.
animation, I feel like.
Yeah,
So,
in an actually lucrative way too.
yeah, I think now I meet younger people who are interested in animation writing, that it is often their focus. I think a lot of them are coming to it with shows like Rick and Morty, or
Right. Right.
even like older stuff like The Simpsons. Well, The Simpsons came out when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
So before that, what we really had was all those Hanna-Barbera clones of Scooby-Doo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they were sort of clearly written by people who were maybe like the creativity in the storytelling wasn't their first priority. They seemed more like kind of like they were punching a clock a little bit.
yeah.
Totally.
I mean, there was a lot of creative stuff that was going on, but it didn't seem to be like it is today by any means.
No, I mean, it was a factory, right? Like, all those old cartoons were like, they saw dollar signs, and once they figured out a formula, they just kind of kept milking it. So all those shows kind of blur together.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some crazy GI Joe episodes, for example. Like the creativity would sort of like filter through, but I think it was dependent really on somebody having something that they were bringing to it that wasn't necessary, and that nobody was asking for.
Yeah.
Mm.
I saw somebody tweet about it just yesterday, I think. And if they listen to this, you can call me out for not remembering who it was. But they were saying how, like, all those shows are so similar, and it really doesn't make any sense why Scooby-Doo was the big breakout when they're all basically the same thing. Like, it just seems totally arbitrary. But I don't know. Maybe there's a reason.
I think Scooby-Doo was the first one with that particular format. And I'm actually a big Scooby-Doo fan, so I'll defend Scooby-Doo until
I also heard that for Scooby-Doo, the entry point for younger kids is that Scooby is he acts like a child. For kids, like very young kids, they could just kind of have the entry point through the dog, who they like identify with, because he's scared all the time, and little kids are like scared a lot of times. And then they can kind of like look up to the Quatuor, like the other four characters, as kind of like their like older siblings kind of thing. So in that sense, it's like pretty well thought out. I mean, they probably stumbled upon it, but it's like that's kind of like the psychological. I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe
it's very astute. I mean, my love of Scooby-Doo is because it teaches kids to be skeptics.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always a white guy.
Stick it to the man.
Too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You're led to believe that it could be the supernatural, but on that show they're very clear it's always some white dude in a mask. There's been other permutations of the show, because after years and years and years, like they couldn't keep doing the same thing, so now there's been supernatural and stuff like that, but it still means it's it's always they're always detectives, and it's always investigating the supernatural. So at the very least, it's always about pursuing a mystery, and meaning digging deeper and trying to find information. What's going on behind?
Well, they were hippies, right? They're basically like teenage hippies of the time, like counterculture, right? And so, like,
that's true. Yeah. Skeptical of the man.
They all represent a different type of teen in that era. And so I guess it just kind of captured a lot of different types, because everyone can relate to somebody.
Honestly, also mystery shows always do really well.
Yeah.
Like mysteries are when you think, even like in books, like the book series, like Nancy Drew, or like
that is true, huh?
Yeah. What's it called? The Hardy Boys, like all these kind of like little group of kids solving mysteries.
Yeah. It as a kid, it's really lovely, I think, when you start to have your first confrontations with those things that aren't what they look like initially. That can be a really lovely thing to happen, like where you start to unpack something and you're like, oh, there's more to this, and I can bring my problem solving abilities to the story and try to figure out what's going on. Like it's engaging for a kid to realize, like, I can be a participant. I think the great thing about mysteries, and also it's also one of the great things about podcasts, is like you're making it up as you're experiencing it. You're trying to figure out, like, it's, even if it's like, who's the killer? You're trying to figure out who the killer is. So you're saying, well, it could have been so and so, and they could have tried this, or they could have tried that, or they could have covered their tracks in this way. That's not in the story. That's something you're bringing to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like almost interactive in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your first writing gig in animation, or was there a gig before animation?
There were many, many gigs before animation. No, but yeah, writing wise, I did do some writing in reality television, which was the least favorite part of my of all of the jobs I've had. The reality shows were like the most challenging for me.
How would you kind of describe what it was like writing for reality TV?
Well, I didn't do much. I should qualify, but you're taking so the way the writing process works is first you are gathering a lot of footage,
Mhm.
and the writing really begins even at that point because you're starting to see, if you haven't planned them, you're starting to see where the conflicts are between
Mhm.
the characters, and then making sure the producers, and I did a little bit of associate producing too, are pinpointing questions that can heighten those conflicts.
Mhm.
And then once you have all the footage, that gets transcribed and turned into a kind of a paper edit. So that they pre-edit the footage by just moving. So that's what a lot of the work of reality TV writers is taking those chunks of story that have been shot, and making them into, fit into either a specific format depending on the show,
Mhm.
or highlighting really what those conflicts, going back to what those conflicts are and highlighting them even more. So then if they need to, they can gather additional footage. They're often sort of like really manipulating footage and editing,
Mhm.
doing everything that they can to take whatever is in the footage and turn that into super compelling stories.
Mhm.
And of course, like the lowest hanging fruit is always not just the conflict, but the
Right.
nastier conflicts. So that's what
Mhm.
made it challenging for me. I remember one
Right.
time it didn't fit into a producer's idea of what the story was, that one of our subjects had kids. It was a
Huh.
makeover show. And the makeover shows are built around these big dramatic reveals.
Yeah.
And the
Mhm.
producers didn't want this guy's kids to come to the reveal.
Huh.
It was like and as a film student who had also some background in studying documentary,
Mm.
Yeah.
it just all seems so, sort of, I mean, you do that in documentary too,
Mm.
but you're less interested in creating those stories in documentary for just this kind of endless pipeline,
Right.
then you do usually typically have like a little bit more of a goal that's single-minded, with
Do you
documentary.
do you feel like working in reality TV kind of took a little bit of a toll on your mental health in terms of like, like having to write all these storylines, working with all these like conflicts that are not always the kind of conflicts that maybe you would have wanted to push towards?
I can say that I don't like watching reality television when it comes on. I'm typically, with some exceptions, typically, like, it just makes me uncomfortable to hear that kind of music cues that they use,
Mm.
and the interview formats and all of that stuff brings back memories that aren't fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
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 Um, but so there was some writing in that area, but the first real professional writing job was on South Park.
That is so
I'd love to hear about
cool.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fascinating.
Well, the
Yeah.
way that happened was I had a friend who was on staff, and my friend was also, his partner, um, in romance, is also friends with Matt Stone and Trey Parker,
Hmm.
Mm.
and they both kind of talked me up, and I didn't know this was happening. I kept sort of like joking with them, like, who'd be great on South Park? It would be me.
That's such a good.
Oh.
I call it like passive aggressive begging.
Yes. Hey, that's the best kind of begging.
Yeah. So I would say that from time to time, but I had zero expectation that they were taking me remotely seriously. And also knew nothing, as I mentioned before, like, people weren't sharing information about how that's done. So I didn't even know you needed to have a writing sample to get a job like that. I had nothing. I had written screenplays because since film school I'd been writing, and I didn't. These aren't really like professional jobs, but I'd even gotten paid a few times from like sort of private individuals who, either like a friend who wanted to be a director, so he needed a screenplay to go out with, or other circumstances like that. But I'd never been, paid seriously, and I had no TV writing samples. So only one of the screenplays I'd written like 7 by then. Only one of them was comedy, and I showed it to my friend, the South Park writer, and his partner is also in animation, and said, "Should I submit this as a sample?" They read it and they were like, "Please bury this."
Damn, that's brutal.
Don't show it to anybody.
Don't speak to us again.
Yeah. This was after they had gotten me a meeting, to my absolute shock, with Matt Stone. So that was coming up. And it was coming up so fast, there was no time to generate a new sample. So they were like, just come up with some ideas for episodes. And I was really green. I mean, like incredibly green. So the only one I can even remember was, it'd be fun to see South Park Babies. And of course, like, I feel like that pitch has been done a zillion times.
Yes.
Now, if it hadn't been done a zillion times before then, it's been done a zillion times after. But that's the only one I even remember. So I had a bunch of pitches for episodes. Matt Stone was coming off of painkillers from a sports injury that he had. So
wow.
he wasn't in he was nice, but he wasn't in the greatest mood.
Mm-hmm.
The producer was very nice. Her name's Ann Garofino. I had nothing but good experiences with her. But I had the meeting, and I knew so little about what to say or do. They asked me if I had any questions. I was like, "What's it like working with Ween?" I love that band. Not the question you're supposed to ask, though.
I mean, you can
what
relate
do you feel
to...
like? Okay, now what kind of questions would you have asked now?
Oh, now I would ask, like, how do you like to, how does your room work? Like that, like just a lot of questions about what the day-to-day would look like, so that way, like, I did get really good advice. I'm friends with an actor named David Herman, and he's like he went to Purchase also. And he was one of the few people I knew who was at a level where I even knew he'd have an intelligent answer to the question, what do I do with this meeting? So I begged him for help, and he said, even though you probably feel like you're desperate, and I was super desperate to get that job, he said, you might feel like you're really desperate to get that job, but you have to remember you're interviewing them too.
Yeah, that's true.
And what it's going to be like work on that show, it's even if you get on there, if it's not a good fit, and this wisdom has only been proven to me to be more and more useful the older I get. But he said, even if you get on there and you think that this is the thing that you need, if it's not a good fit, it can do more damage than it can help. This is not something I was, even really prepared to hear at the time. But it didn't turn out to be a problem because I didn't get the job.
Right.
And I sure didn't earn it from either the pitches I had or the performance at I had at the meeting. But a year went by, and I made a short, and my buddy on the staff brought the short in to show it to them. And it wasn't animated, but I had some drawings and cutouts of images I printed out on the internet and stuck them on the ends of pencils and kind of waved them around and shouted a lot. And so it sort of related to their animation style a little bit, because marginally, because there were cutouts involved. It was this kind of really angry short film about Mel Gibson being an anti-Semitic jerk. And
Was this before he said all those things or after?
It was actually before he said most
of
the things that he's famous for in regards to
knew.
Aesthetic. There was already evidence, clear evidence of his anti-Semitism that was on the record.
Yeah, he sucks.
and his Jesus movie is also was kind of known for being anti-Semitic. So it was about the time of that movie's release, and my it was about him getting hair plugs, just so he was trying to convince the studio that he could play Jesus. Doesn't work, and also he most of the movie is just him very painfully getting the hair plugs with a lot of crudely drawn gore.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if they liked it or not, but then I got offered a job, and I was a production assistant on a really weak example of a VH1 reality show. It was the one, probably no one remembers this, where they caught people singing in their cars.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like like carpool karaoke.
Yeah,
is a late night bit. That's how I thought of it even at the time. Like, this is enough. This is like compelling enough for a bit on a late night show. But they had 2 seasons, and I was a PA, and got a call that I was gonna get an offer to work on South Park as a writer, and I couldn't believe it. And they said, the only thing is you have to come in tomorrow. Can you do that?
Wow.
I was like,
damn,
absolutely.
Wow, that's so
Yeah.
cool. I love also like just kind of like rewinding a little bit to what you're talking about, making a short with cutouts on pencils. I think that is so interesting and cool, because when I was interviewing Marley, who's also a writer, he also mentioned getting noticed for writing by making some kind of like a crude stop motion kind of short. And I think that's like so interesting that for writers, it is like a really, really good thing to consider, making something that is very low budget, that is still visual, but where you can really showcase your writing skills. I think that's really cool to hear.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get very focused on writing samples, and rightly so. I mean, you need the writing samples to get the work, no doubt. But then along with that, they get focused on getting managers, getting agents.
Sure.
And then there comes a point where it's like you've been doing all your networking. You've gotten all the meetings you can get on your own. And then it's like, what do I do next? I have scripts. I've hit a wall. There is more that you can do as a writer. You can collaborate with actors. You can, essentially that do it yourself thing is just so important for anybody who's trying to, kind of make it in show business. But I think writers get kind of like into they frequently have that feeling of like painting themselves into a corner where there's nothing left that they can try. Like they've done their script, they have their pitches, they feel like they have their samples, but their contacts just aren't getting them anywhere new. It's like, well, then make something, collaborate with an artist and make a web comic, do something crude and do it on your own. Put drawings up on your Twitter. I think Amalia Lavari had a Tumblr where she wrote little things that would fit on Post-its. And that got her first manager.
Interesting.
So there's always a way that you can, it's not even like necessarily about promoting or marketing yourself, because the great thing about that stuff is that's where you get to be purely original and purely creative. And you don't have to think about marketing or promotion. You can just be like, where's my joy bringing me, or what's going to make me really happy? What's going to make me laugh? To put it out there and share it with, like, even if it's just sharing it with my friends. So instead of them always hearing from you, like, and being like, oh, I did another draft of my sample, will you read it again? Instead of that, you could send them a gag cartoon you did. They'll be much happier to. And I think that was crucial to me getting. I mean, it was the step that got me on South Park. Is I wasn't trying to make that Mel Gibson thing for any kind of career purpose. I just really hated Mel Gibson.
I love that. That's
Just
so
rage.
funny. I do feel like doing like a very funny rant. Like I feel like when I've done like a couple of writing classes or improv classes, there's always that prompt that comes up where it's like, all right, let's have you just like angrily rant, like, but in a funny way, about something like, you know, that I don't know, you have no control over, or that's just like ridiculous. Because I feel like there's like a lot of comedy in just like, I don't know, ranting about something that has a little bit of truth to it. So yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
just a thought.
And emotion, like just like it's genuine emotion. So that's easier to connect with than a lot of times like what you're doing when you're writing something that you think will help you in your career is calculating,
Yes.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, I've definitely felt that, and I'm sure other people do too. But it is hard. Like, I think what you said about collaborating is a big thing, because like I've had conversations with writers, and they all have the same sort of roadblock, and all the ones I know that are successful, they've done projects outside of just writing, because then it like shows. I like the idea. I think that there's a lot to be said for honestly starting like video essay channels on YouTube. I think that that's kind of a new frontier for like writing your thoughts down, and you know, and having them play out in front of people in a way that is actually engaging, because nobody wants to sit down and read anything.
But
right?
you'd even be surprised though. Like I follow a couple of webcomic artists that are more, they're closer to being a writer than to being like an illustrator, and they can get a lot of stuff out just with very few drawings. You could just do like,
Sure.
and sometimes the drawings don't even have to be really good. Like you can even look at what's that webcomic, Cyanide and
Oh yeah, Cyanide and Happiness.
yeah, the drawings are very like, I think any
They're good stick figures.
yeah. So, but everybody reads it because it's always nice to have like a little picture.
Yeah.
Well, there was even like I think his name's Ryan North doing the dinosaur comics way back in the day, webcomic.
Oh yeah.
Where it was, I think, literally the same panels over and over.
Yeah.
But it was just insightful, smart. Or like XKCD, which is even more crude stick figures. But that dude is like a brilliant scientist, comedian. Like it's insane. So yeah, I mean, if you're talented, talent comes through. That's for sure.
Strange Planet was a webcomic first, and
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
and Nathan Pyle, the creator, knows how to draw, but the style that he employed for those webcomics is, I think even deliberately crude, there's an elegance to it, but I mean, just in terms of like, you don't have to feel like, if you're a writer and this interests you, and say you're somebody that happens to doodle, if you've got little guys that you do or something like that, like this could be a great option, especially if you do think of it as like, how do you, what's the minimalist approach in terms of like, if drawing's not your best foot forward, then okay, but do what you think is appealing and see how you can support it with your writing. Is it like you could do a lot, for example, with like a talking head. So if a lot of people sort of like obsessively draw themselves with different hairdos. So if you do that, like just this talking head of yourself with like different hairdos like that, that can be a fun webcomic. I would check it out.
Yeah.
No, there's tons of options. There was a lot of I mean, it always comes back to webcomics, but I think that it is a very effective tool for just showing off writing, right?
Yeah.
Because how else?
I'm just gonna toot my own horn really fast before getting back onto the South Park, but literally, I recently landed my first writing gig, freelance. And
nice.
Literally, thank you so much, Daddy. Yeah, it was literally my comics. I was like, oh, your comics are great. Well, do you have like a script just so we could prove to our producer that you can write in the script format. And I was like, let me punch up that Loud House spec that I wrote years ago.
Yeah.
But literally they were just like, I think they just wanted to like it's a show for Disney, and they literally were like, oh, we like the comic. I think they just kind of like glossed over the script. But yeah, so it's all, I mean, I think everybody who is supposed to read samples would rather look at something visual.
That's yeah, and I think that's right. Like I don't think if my buddy had brought a new script sample I had written to the South Park writers' room that they would have read it.
Yeah.
But he was like, "This is 4 minutes long." So, and just watch it. You know, that that's much easier. Making a short. So I was so glad you mentioned improv.
Oh yeah.
That's another place I think for writers to because you have to write pitches, you have to write your your spec scripts, your sample scripts. You have to do all of that stuff and have like a you have to have a little portfolio of work already. But then yeah, you hit that wall and it's like, what else can I do? Well, it's like, okay, well, improv is going to help you with pitching. And you don't only pitch when you're pitching a show or when you're pitching yourself to get a job. You're going to be pitching in the room if you get into a writer's room, and you'll sometimes be doing it for 60 hours a week. Wouldn't it help to have some technique? And then on the side of like, what can you create to kind of push yourself forward? Well, write a play. If you're in an improv class, you're going to be there with a half dozen or more actors who are just going to be just as anxious to get themselves out there. But for them, the problem is different. They don't have material. They have energy and contacts, and because there's typically very social people, actors, and energetic. So you can try to, deploy them in service of putting something together that can help all of you, I think there is an improv group. I always think about this one video, Immortal Dog.
Oh my God, really? Immortal Dog?
Do you know that
what
one?
A reference. Immortal Dog. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
It's so fucking funny. I still quote it to this day. I can't believe you just brought up Immortal Dog.
Yeah, I always think about that because it's like a minute and a half long.
It's so short.
Yeah, and it's
yeah. He doesn't trust you anymore. It's so fucking good.
Yeah, and it's something that was put together by this little improv group, and I think the writer and the director of it went to Saturday Night Live at some point, or maybe the director did Key and Peele and the writer went to Saturday Night Live. But it was such a great calling card because it's a minute and a half, it's completely hilarious, and it's unforgettable.
No, it really is. Well, there's a lot of skits, right? Like, I mean, the internet provides an opportunity to just be funny without a filter, but also a barrier of entry. And like stuff like even like Whitest Kids You Know back in the day, or like Smosh, like all those YouTube, those are all writers, right? Like they also happen to be performers, but they're writers first and foremost, I think. That's, when you're young, I don't, maybe they would contest that, but I think
unless you have family in it or you're lucky, when you're young, you don't necessarily have the show business contacts, but what you do have is everybody who's in that age range is aggressively social at that period in their lives. So and with social media, it would always blow my mind. Like, so like I grew up with I talk on the phone and with my friends, and I would have a cord, and I'd have to like sit in the living room the whole conversation if I had a 2-hour conversation. So getting to the age of social media where people have like thousands of friends or followers, and it's just because of who they grew up with and, being kind of funny or popular in that form, that's amazing. That's an incredible asset, and something that wasn't available.
No, it's true.
That's
it
very
available
true.
when I was growing up.
So
gather your forces, kind of.
Yeah,
for sure.
Get them behind something if you have something to share.
totally.
So let's jump forward a little bit. What was your first gig as a head writer or story editor?
I did want to hear a tiny bit about South
okay.
Park though, just like real fast.
Yeah, I guess we kind of skipped over it.
Yeah, because I kind of took us on like a tangent, but I would want to know kind of like how it was like working for South Park, like how long, and kind of like how was the room like, and all these kind of like little details that would be really fun.
Working on South Park was the best first job I could have gotten as an animation writer, because it was, first of all, I had no right to be in that room. The person that I followed was the creator of All in the Family.
Oh.
Norman Lear, who created maybe like 8 or 10 of the biggest shows in television history. His grandson loved South Park, and he turned on Norman Lear to South Park, and so he called them up and he said, "Hey, can I come be on your staff?" And they were like, "Sure," because he's this incredible legend in television, and in also like incredibly rich and powerful. And it was funny because they didn't really have a great rapport, and so they had to fire him.
Oh,
damn! That's you gotta be, you gotta fit the room, right?
Well, after firing one of the most experienced people in television, one of the greatest television writers in history, they hired me.
Hey, that's a feather in your cap. I feel like that's a flex.
I think it's an indication of how weirdly they hire, but it was, a thorough education in just terms of like, here's what a TV writer does, and being in a room, getting to pitch. Matt and Trey are brilliant and funny and incredibly talented, so it's just super entertaining just being there. They're if anyone's interested in how the show is produced, there's a great documentary you can see on YouTube, 6 days to air, and they really do it that way. So you show up on I think it's typically, was it like Thursday morning? You show up, and hopefully there's some idea of what story you'll work on, because the following Wednesday it airs.
God, that's like insane.
That's so insane.
I don't...
That's so crazy. Yeah,
everything
like
from character design to boards to the mix to the music to scoring. It's all done, and the animation, it's all done within 6 days.
I think that's an impressive feat, but man, has it done a lot of damage to like the public's perception of how long it takes to make a thing. Like I really think that documentary fucked things up for a lot of
I think it's also, but I feel like, I don't know, it's just such a specific thing. I don't know. I mean, I see what you're saying.
It's not, we know that it's a specific thing.
Yeah.
We know that it's, what they sacrifice, and the look of the show is so simple. But also, it's twofold, because people don't know how hard those people actually work. Even watching that documentary, it doesn't quite capture, because I've seen it, but it doesn't quite capture the burnout.
I agree.
And I've talked to people who worked on the show, other than like animators, and my God, like it's like they basically just work like round the clock for like 2-3 months.
Yeah.
And that's not good.
And it's not a union show.
And it's not, I was going to say, and it's not a union show.
They lack certain protections. On the other hand,
yeah,
there is some thought put into it. And this may be for Trey and Matt's convenience more than or as much as the crew, but they will take 3 months off. And also they usually, or at the time at least, they were doing hiatus pay. Not for the writers.
Oh, that's good.
Unless it was like a writer who was like with the show for a very long time.
Yeah.
But the crew gets hiatus pay. So they're 3 months on, 3 months off, but still getting paid. It's a reduced amount, but it's kind of like an opportunity to do your own thing during that time. Although I think you're right, the burnout can be harsh. So sometimes that could be what they're doing with those 3 months. But the people that work on South Park are very often kind of like cult members. Like, and I'm not saying this in a bad way. They're like there for their passion. They just
they
really love
believe
being
in it.
on that show.
Yeah, the person that I talked to was working as an animator in games, and he would just go back. Like he was like, yeah, I work in South Park. And I was like, holy shit, like what do you do? He's like, yeah, it's like every time they need me, like I go back. And I'm like, but you have a job here. But the job that he was working didn't pay well, and probably actually a lot worse than they do on South Park. And so it was a chance for him to maybe, I'm speculating, but it was probably a chance for him to like make some good money working on something that felt a little more fulfilling, and then go back to the shitty games job.
Dude, like South Park is so influential. Like I feel like, I don't know, like it's huge. Everybody,
it's global.
Yeah, like all over the world. Like I remember watching it. I remember when I was 12 in France, and that was when the movie came out, and that was a huge thing. It was like everybody was talking about it. So it's still big now. It's still really big now.
And that was one of the really great things about being there. For me as my first gig was just getting to see Trey and Matt put a story together.
Yeah.
And the way it would typically work is Trey would walk around, he'd be pacing around the conference room table, and he'd start talking through what was going to happen. As soon as we had an idea, which sometimes that would be the struggle, is like, what's the idea of the episode? But once there was like a kind of a crystallized thought, after the agony of landing on something, once there was a crystallized thought, he'd start pacing around the table and pitching out how the episode would move forward, and then 2 or 3 jokes every couple of minutes, and sort of like getting to that point where there's a joke and pitching it to the table. And if we were laughing, sometimes he'd move on, and then other times he'd be pacing around the table pitching out stuff that wouldn't land as hard. So then he'd start over again, still pacing, and then he'd get to a point where he'd say something like, okay, I have everything I need to the first commercial.
Wow.
And he could do that. He could time it out in his head, plot wise and joke wise. And then he would sometimes he wouldn't say that and would just walk out of the conference room. So we would get there around 10 or 11, and usually bullshit a little bit. And then that would begin. And then at some point, and this could happen anytime, like we would order lunch, and there would be lunch and beverages. It was very nicely taken care of as a writer on that show. But at some point he'd walk out of the conference room either before or after lunch, or 20 hours later. He'd walk out of the conference room and then go start typing. So a lot of the times there wasn't even typing done in the room. And a producer might have to jog down after him. It's like, oh, is it time to send the writers home?
Did you
look up absentmindedly and be like, oh yeah, they can go home.
Did you write did you write a script, or did you were you mostly just like pitching jokes?
Just pitching.
Wow.
Just pitching, jokes and story ideas.
Wow.
Should we bring in this character for this? And but the my rate, like you talk about a pitching rate sometimes at the room, I have to admit my pitching rate was not great, just because of my lack of experience. I really didn't even know. And I other good advice that I had received was, if you're not 100% sure when you're just starting out, you can't get into too much trouble for being quiet. Like, they want to hear from you. They'll want to hear pitches. They'll want to hear ideas and jokes. They're not going to get mad at you if you're quiet, so especially since if you're starting out, it's fine to kind of read the room, take that time to take the temperature of what plays and what doesn't play. And I was there for half a season, so it wasn't that long. And I remember one of the pitches that I'm certain that was me that got in wasn't even a pitch. We were waiting for the meeting to start. I think Trey wasn't even in the room yet. And I turned to Matt Stone and I asked him if he'd ever seen this crappy TV show called Man from Atlantis. And I started ragging on it. And just because we were waiting to begin. It was a very silly TV show that was on. It was kind of like an Aquaman, but for 70s network television, so real low budget. One of their special effects for one of their bad guys was literally a disco ball. It's like, oh no, they're in the room everywhere. Those little
Yeah.
lights. So I was ragging on the show, and then come to find out that next Wednesday the episode opens, and one kid turns to another kid in the cafeteria, the minor characters, and says, "You ever see that show Man from Atlantis?" And I was like, "That wasn't a pitch."
I love it. That's so funny. I think, yeah, what's great about what you're saying is like kind of like you can't get in trouble for being quiet. It's a really interesting thing to hear because I remember we had an episode previously with Sean Glaze who told us like when he was in the room for the first time, he really wanted to show that he could participate and he was talking all the time and that got him into trouble.
Yes, yeah, I think that's something that can happen with green writers, is this feeling of like, so you are there to talk. That is the reason why you're there. Um, and your boss will want to hear from you, but very often they know some of what they're doing, and even getting that out and kind of field testing it with your room is going to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it also takes a lot of concentration. So the main thing is to be keyed into what is the conversation the showrunner, or if it's a head writer that's running the room, or whoever's running the writing, it's like, what is the conversation that they want to be having, being keyed into that. And I think of it as like that game we all played with a balloon when we're little.
I don't know what that is.
Where you try to keep it from touching the floor.
I see.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you try to do that with the conversation. You try to do that with story.
Sure, that's a good metaphor.
If you think of like, how can I keep everybody's mood in that state too? Because things get dark when you start like running out of ideas. So how do you keep everybody from, just shitting on each other? Like, let's find a way to like ask some questions that are fun. Sometimes you'll just have to tell a bunch of really dirty jokes or something like that just to get everybody's mind off of things, and get back to a place of like, okay, we're just enjoying being here. And then if you're enjoying being there, then you can kind of return to the task at hand. But it can be a problem if a green writer is feeling like they want to be heard and they're not really tracking what that conversation is and how can they contribute, and how can they also stay out of the way when things are getting done. Because if things are getting done, you just don't want to say anything.
Right.
I feel like that's almost like a more general piece of advice that like I've noticed. I feel like saying less is usually going to be more, because like a confident person is going to stay quiet until they have something good to say. If you're insecure and you're trying to prove yourself, you're going to go on, and that applies to a lot of things. And I feel like if you are like calm and you wait for the right moment, that it's going to mean a lot more than if you just like babble on and fatigue everybody who's listening to you. They're going to start checking out.
Yeah, 100%. And also that's 100% descriptive of most of my life.
Sure, same. Yeah.
Anxiously and insecurely babbling. But I think a lot of the things that are good writing room practices are actually great practices for collaborating in any way, shape, or form. Like even if like you have somebody who's coming and like put a new roof on your house, yes, anding them is good.
Yep.
I mean, that's from
that's
improv.
True. That's very true. Yeah. Same principles.
Similar.
I wanted
nice.
to transition into talking about head writing and story editing, and the way that I'll segue that boopity boop. Something that I find interesting about like leading a room and to connect it to what we were just talking about is like letting things deviate away from, because you're sitting there, you're trying to crack a joke, or you're trying to like crack a story, you're trying to figure out a funny bit. But I have seen it even when you and I were working together, like we would go off on tangents for like 40 minutes talking about something else. And when you're in that moment and you're trying to get stuff done, like for me, it starts to get like, oh shit, like we're wasting time. I used to feel like that, but then I realized that, you know, you let your mind rest for a minute, and sometimes that weird tangent conversation will unlock something, and then you solve the problem completely, not in a way you thought. And it's like a weird thing, you know, like you would be talking about the like Planet Panic pilot or something, and like you would tell me a story about some childhood thing, or we would be complaining about somebody, I don't know, and then suddenly it's like, we'll like, yeah, well, you know, they're just like, some people just do that, and then it'll like, oh wait, that's what the character should be doing, like, and it's just funny how you got to let the room like breathe a little bit.
Yeah.
Is there any other like techniques or sort of things you've learned from trying to control a writer's room?
Yeah, I think my style is very specific to like what works for me, so it won't work for everybody. But
Okay.
for me, it is all about encouraging. A lot of this actually I did pick up from Carl Greenblatt. And that was the first head writing for animation job. I did I was a head writer on the Aquabat Super Show before that, which
Oh,
was
that's really
live
cool.
action, but we worked mostly with
Yeah.
freelancers, and there was animation, but it were just shorts. So Harvey Beaks was the first animation head writing gig, and Carl and I talked about how, because he was going to be very present in the room, and he was, and he's the greatest and one of the greatest people to have in a room. We talked about how he'd want the room to run. And for him, the most important thing was that everyone would feel like they could contribute. That feeling that like there isn't a bad pitch, there isn't, and even that there isn't an irrelevant question or an irrelevant, you know, tangent. Like he just wanted it to feel super comfortable. Like it's a joy to have a conversation with these people. And so I come here every day and it's fun. It's fun to talk. And in the process, a story is created, you know. That works really well for me. I can definitely like be the drill sergeant when it's needed. Like, okay, we got to be on task. Animation schedules are always about crunch. So there's no question that, you know, sometimes you have to pull everybody together and just kind of snap to it and that kind of stuff. But honoring everybody's individual contributions and just basically making everybody feel like you want to hear what they have to say and they should feel totally comfortable to say anything is for me a method that um and you can expand it's a method that works best because I think then the joy comes through and people are really excited about what they're doing. So, you know, you're more likely to get the work on time with that extra effort put in. That's how I view it. I view, you know, collaboration and support as being the best ways, you know, if you're talking about a collaborative medium. So likewise, even in terms of like what stories are we going to do, like I'm always going to ask a writer, what's the story that you want to tell, obviously with these characters in this, you know, format in this world, but what's the story that's personal to you? That's the one that I want to see a writer do. And so then coming back to the position of like running a room, what you want to do is enable and support that. Okay, we're talking about your story now. Where do you want to take it? Like, you know, maybe if it feels like there's not enough conflict, what conflict does the writer feel like, you know, is going to drive our main character to make some interesting choices, you know? You bring it back to them and say, if this is based on your life, like what actually happened, you know? Can we go back to the real events? Or if it's coming from their imagination, it's like, well, what makes you laugh? You know, what's a choice this character would make that would make sense to you? What's the choice you would make if you were them? So always asking questions like that and never like trying to get ahead of what it is that the writer is excited about doing.
Mhm.
Um, that's huge for me. There's also like those kind of like uh I don't want to say common sense, but there's like some basic cool stuff that was handed down to me by other writers that I think is like just kind of oral tradition of like sometimes writers will share with other writers a few of these things, a few of these ideas, like never pitch a problem, pitch a solution.
Mhm.
This is
Mhm.
one of my favorites. Is often you hit a point in a story where it's not working.
Mhm.
Maybe it's just not working for you. Maybe it's not working for the whole room. But talking about something, calling it out for the fact that it's not working, talking about why it's not working and stuff, that tends to be, if we're thinking about that balloon metaphor, tends to be something that lets that balloon to hit the floor.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if you come in and say, hey, instead of what we have here, have we thought of this? Or in addition to what we have here, what if we try this? You know,
Mhm.
um, opening it up to like approaching a problem with a what if question,
Yeah.
and instead of like, well, here's this why this isn't working, you know, tends to keep things like exciting and fun.
Mhm.
And also you don't get into that case of like, well, somebody brought that idea, so you're knocking their ego,
Yeah. Mhm.
you know. Another one of
Okay.
those is never knock a pitch. So
Yeah.
somebody has an idea, don't tell them it's bad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You can always
Yeah.
pitch
I mean,
something
because
else.
even the bad ideas sometimes have a kernel of like something good. Like you just have to work it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you want to say what was behind that idea? Is it perhaps fixing something that I didn't know was broken, or adding something I didn't know was missing? And then can we plus it? You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, a, a big thing you want to look out for if you're in writing rooms is you don't want to keep pitching the same things.
Yeah.
And so if you catch a writer and they're doing that, then you may have to point out. So usually you don't want to be negative, but you may want to point out like, okay, we have actually considered that and we talked about it and we've moved on, you know.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes you do have to do that. You do have to kind of
Mm.
share with the writer that the thing that they thought was going to fix it isn't quite the fix they thought it is.
Yeah.
Sure. So let's jump ahead a little bit just because we're getting short on time. Um, what changes for your role when you go up to supervising producer on a show?
So the story editor title is kind of a catch-all title. It's come to
Mhm.
mean head writer. Um, but you can start as a editor doing some producing stuff. Like if you're a part of casting, if you're a part of if you go to the records and you share like how a scene should be directed with the voice director or whoever's doing that gig. Um, if you're in on the animatics and helping with the editing, or if you're participating in scratch or directing scratch performances, then those are producing. Um, some of those are producing jobs or tasks rather. So those are things that I started doing on other shows, but it's only recently that I also got the credit. So it really is sort of like a natural evolution. I think a lot of people do the job before they get the title. Excuse me. You do the
Mm.
job before you get the title, so you've kind of like proven that you can do it. Um, but participation in casting, uh, uh, going to audio records with the actors, doing any kind of directing of scratch or participating in the animatics, all of that stuff can either fall under the story editor umbrella or can make you a producer.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you absorb a lot responsibilities when you get to that level, right?
Mm.
It's a lot more than just writing.
Yeah, and I think like producing is also like a huge part of it is also like that stuff that goes into show creation, but you're just doing that as part of like what's required as being a writer. So for example, with Harvey Beaks, I remember Carl had an enormous amount fleshed out of what he wanted. But when we got to the parents, he was like, I don't really have anything for the dad. And so coming up with like what Harvey, that became a task of the writing room, to come up with like what Harvey's dad was all about. In particular, he had a few more thoughts about the mom. So there's like show creation stuff that you would also think of as kind of maybe producerial, if that is a word.
We're gonna make it a word.
Okay. Officially a word.
Officially a word. We had some questions. Let's start with the questions on our Discord. From user Nick. Hey Donnie, I often struggle with comedy in my scripts, so I was wondering if you had any advice about tapping into your funny bone to deliver solid jokes. Thanks, hope you're having a good day.
Oh, great question. I think it's really hard because like if a joke is known to work, then it's been done before. So you do have to create jokes, and you have to keep in mind too that if something is too familiar, that it'll feel like it won't make people laugh because we've seen it before. But if it's too strange, then they won't even know they're supposed to laugh. So you have to, I think, approach it very much from like, I am looking for gold. I am looking for new things. And one way to approach it is like, what makes me laugh, and not what makes me laugh in media, but in life. And make sure you're keeping like a journal of those things. Again, I'm really glad you mentioned improv, because that is a great place to go to in terms of like, how do you develop your own sense of humor?
Honestly,
they'll
yeah.
provide techniques.
I was gonna say, sorry, I cut you off, but when I took the improv class with UCB, they make you read the UCB manual, improv manual, and it's so great. It's so great for character comedy, and I wish I had this book recommended to me 20 years earlier, because it's like I always had like an idea what a story should feel like. I feel like very early on people will teach kind of like inciting incident, like very plot driven techniques, but character comedy is never really taught in school, in creative writing most of the time. And for me, that was improv. It was like, oh, they figured it out and laid it all out in a book.
Yeah. Are you talking about Truth in Comedy?
No, it's like, let me Google it real fast. I think it's literally called the UCB improv manual, because I took improv with UCB.
Okay.
It's like a red book with the mask on it.
Okay. I don't know that one. But it sounds great.
Yeah.
I would also recommend Truth in Comedy, which I think that came out of Second City.
Oh, that's why. It's because I haven't done Second City. So
Okay.
I don't know their teachings. I've done the UCB one, and
They're
each have their
all
little
related. Yeah.
Yeah.
They have related approaches, but that's definitely going to be very helpful. I mean, I'm kind of obsessive and freakish about gathering people's like comedy theories. Like I think Seinfeld said, it's about taking an illogical proposition and arguing it to its
Yeah,
kind of logical conclusion.
It's a really interesting way to think of it.
Yeah. But I think what you said is even more important, V, is like bringing it back to character.
Yeah.
So what are the character choices? First, you have to have funny characters. You have to come up with a character that has something funny about them. And that's also something that we talked about a lot in Harvey Beaks, and Carl Greenblatt's really great at both doing it and explaining it. But Harvey's a terrific example. Like he doesn't want to be cool. He thinks he's cool already.
Yeah, that's such a good twist on that whole thing.
To be a guy that wears cargo pants and is constantly concerned about safety protocol, doing things correctly, being polite,
That is cool.
and being 100% certain that he's the coolest kid on the block.
Yeah.
I love that. That's very
And
cute.
that's another one I think Carl mentioned is a character that sees themselves one way, but the rest of the world sees them another way.
Yes.
Sure.
I love that.
Don't we all? User Kitty Fries asked, do you have any advice for anyone that wants to write in general, like a book, course, recommendations, etc.? You guys touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, but I'd say the main advice is to write all the time.
Okay.
Like that, then the writing can lead. And as especially if you're able to devote hours to it. Like I love being able to sit down sometimes and not know what I'm gonna write. It doesn't happen often, but when I can do that, something interesting always comes out. So if you can commit time to just writing, and that's actually also when things really changed for me, is just setting aside some time and making it not just, the thing that I was embracing as a medium or a form or a career, but as a practice, as something to be done every day, whether or not I have an agenda that day.
This is actually probably a good time to ask our favorite question, which is how you deal with creative block and what does it feel like for you?
Well, I think that I have faced burnout more obviously than any kind of creative block. TV's been really great for me because when I was writing screenplays before I got into writing for TV, I'd have all the time in the world to write something. And because I was doing it for myself, even if I had deadlines, it was still plenty of time by comparison to the pipeline that television is. Television gives you deadlines. And when you have the kind of deadlines, there's literally no time to get writer's block. It's just,
yeah.
It's just not possible.
Professionals get to work.
Yeah. So you just have to push through it essentially. And probably the easiest answer is just write something bad. Just don't worry about it. Just write anything. It can be complete garbage and you just keep pushing through it. And we're we're kind of like less and less as a culture familiar with pushing through things. That's what has to be done. And the funny thing is that doesn't really work for burnout. So burnout, you have to employ a different tactic. And I think of that as being something that when you're working in TV is actually like a bigger challenge. And for burnout, you have to find a way to refresh your soul.
Yeah.
So it's a lot harder.
Yep.
Laugh crying
That's
right
true.
now.
Yeah. Pretty Pants asked, I know you can't really teach someone how to be funny, but how to avoid being cheesy? This is interesting.
It's a good question. What I'd leap to is that everybody's got a shit detector. In my freshman year at film school, that's an idea that was introduced to us by our writing teacher, a guy named Howard Enders. He was like an Emmy Award-winning documentary writer. But he was like one of these New York guys. I'm pretty sure he's Jewish. So like kind of sit on his stool all like hunched over and bundled up into this like very tiny little old kind of ranting Jewish man, ranting about writing. And he'd say like each of us has a shit detector. You know it because when you're watching something else and you think it's garbage. And so you just have to be as harsh with what other people do with your own work.
Yeah.
And if you're holding your own work up to the same standard as what you expect from others, then two things happen. One is you're throwing out a lot. But if something feels corny to you, you're calling it out. You're saying, okay, this, and that happens to me a lot with my own work. I'm like, I have just written a cliche. So I'm going to have to, you have to be kind of like fearlessly ready to edit. Just be ready to throw everything out and start from scratch. You don't have to get there from there, kind of thing. Like, don't be convinced that to make your character do this, they have to do that. You have to, really be just as tough on yourself as you are on that new Lord of the Rings show or the new Game of Thrones show.
Yeah.
We had a question on our Twitter from @Chevistian1. Despite being short-lived, can you tell us what was the process of making sweet and heartbreaking moments on Harvey Beaks as opposed to your comedy-driven work?
It's actually similar to the previous answer, which is if like it was going to make us have any kind of feeling, then we were hoping it would work the same way for an audience. And I think that the process in terms of like storytelling is similar because you want to take the audience to like with a SpongeBob episode, you'd want to take the audience to a moment of sort of like peak hilarity. So you find all the different little building blocks that'll, you know, get you to a point where you'll be laughing. But with telling a story that provokes different reaction, it's that same thing, being emotionally open and emotionally aware to what would do that to you with the characters, and then just being unrelenting about the editing process to make sure nothing is taking you off course. The trickiest thing I think with that kind of writing is you want to write something that has emotion but not sentiment. And I think what sentiment is when you're bringing an idea of what someone should feel.
Oh, interesting.
And you want to pare that back and pare that away so it's the pure feeling.
How would you describe the idea of what someone should feel? Like, could you, I know this is kind of a tricky question, but could you come up with like an example to illustrate that idea?
I'll try to. I think it's difficult, but a lot of it is about like where can you remove the dialogue and let the characters and their actions speak for themselves. And I'm thinking of a Harvey Beaks episode from very early on, and a pitch that I had where we were it was the one where Harvey's everyone goes up the tree, and then they realize they're a far like way up the tree. And the parents show up and build like a giant leaf pile that the kids can safely jump into, but they have to take that leap of faith that they won't be hurt. And Harvey's the last one. He's up there all by himself, and he's scared. He doesn't want to jump. And we thought about like, okay, well, how do we share with an audience that his friends are getting him emotionally ready to take this leap of faith? And I thought to myself, well, they have to be with him. He's not going to be able to, they're not going to be able to get him there by not being there. But I couldn't think of anything they could say that wouldn't sound corny. So then I realized all they really need to say is take your time.
Oh, that's really sweet. Yeah.
And
there you go.
And then nothing else. And we had the luxury on that show to have moments that could play out silently. And you just seeing time go by and Harvey getting more and more ready.
That's really good.
Yeah.
It's like it's an obvious solution that you wouldn't think of right away because I feel like writing generally pushes you into like taking action, and like the right thing needs to happen for a thing to happen, but that's not really the case a lot of the time. That's great.
It's a combination of the things that I learned in film school and on SpongeBob, where we were always coming back to that, like, the dialogue takes the air out of the moment. How can we convey this moment visually?
That's so true. I feel it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I remember I was I forgot if it was in an article or like a writing seminar type of thing that I went to, but it was like I think a quote from the showrunner of Dexter and New Blood, and he was saying that like he really liked working with the main actor because often what he would say is like, can I do this scene but without the dialogue? And that often it would work much better. And I'm like, it's like such a good thing to think about, because it's true. Like sometimes you're like writing and you're like so worried that people aren't going to get it, so you're like having the characters say what's like happening, or like and it's so cheesy, or like this is how I feel, or like
going back to the cheesy question,
and that's great.
Limitation breeds creativity.
There's a Clint Eastwood story too where he was on the set of A Fistful of Dollars, and He, is a kind of like a mercenary character that winds up making a big sacrifice to protect a woman and her child. And in the script, she asks him why he's doing this, and he had this long story about
Hmm.
someone that he was in love with, and the child they had together, and it was very involved. And Clint
Mhm.
Eastwood went to the director Sergio Leone and said, "Can I just say, because I knew someone like you once?"
Nice.
And it's
Yeah,
so much more effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure. From at Phage Gaia, what's the most common things you see employees do that would instantly make you consider firing them?
I saw this on Twitter.
Yeah,
This one cracked me up. I mean, I'm rarely in a position where I either hire or fire, but in the animation industry, I think it's one thing that could be kind of reassuring for people to know is it can actually be kind of hard to get fired. Usually,
that's
a
true.
lot of
Mhm.
companies have a certain amount of protocol that has to be followed. So in many cases, you'll get a warning first, and that can be nice. And as long as you're hitting a certain bar of achievement, it's not that your job will be safe. It's just more that, like, if you're not excelling, it's more might be more likely that you won't get rehired as opposed to
Mhm.
like getting fired. So you're often given a lot of room and a lot of time and space to improve. But the things that will get you fired quickly are not showing up for work,
Mm-hmm.
not turning your work in on time,
Mhm.
um, uh, being very, very frequently late, um, actually being openly hostile or weird or mean. I mean, you have to be pretty, pretty extremely that, I think, because there's a lot of allowances for just personalities in animation. And if your work is really substandard, like just not performing on the same level as everybody else, but even with that one, you're typically getting warnings, and then there's often a chance to improve. It's just can be hard to do that if you're just the wrong fit for the show. But um, often you can even ask for feedback if you get into that kind of trouble, and people will tell you exactly what you need to do.
Mhm.
For sure. And then the last question is from at Alley Cat. Favorite dog breed and why?
Well, I love Mutt. I love Mutts the most, because they're all completely unique. There is like a visual thing with black or chocolate Labrador retrievers that just kind of clicks with me right away. But I
That's
can't
like a
speak for,
dog. That's a
yeah,
dog ass dog.
yeah. They're doggish dogs for, yeah. And I think I had a black lab when I was a kid. I think we don't know for sure what the breed was. It was this dog I had for a brief period. Um, Also, my mom gave the dog away.
Damn.
Oh, no.
So, uh, so I definitely have an affinity for black and chocolate labs in a visual way, but I can't speak for their personalities.
Yeah. And your dogs are little mutts, right?
One of them is a Boston Terrier. My wife is
Mm.
obsessed with that breed, and they're so charming and sweet. We get along great with Boston Terriers, but the other dog is either a rat terrier, or combination, or a mutt. Um, and I think with mutts, you get a personality that's just so loyal.
Oh,
They're just,
Yeah.
yeah, they'll teach you what loyalty is.
That's really sweet.
that's really sweet.
What kind of goals do you have for the future, either in your career or in your life?
Also, I've kind of been like either like a number two or number three in command, for a few of the last jobs, which is a great and very privileged position to have. Sometimes it's so great just to not be the one in charge, but I've yet to have my own show.
Mhm.
And I'd be very excited to create something. I'd be very excited
Mm-hmm.
to run my own show and be able to pull together a crew from all the talented super people I know, and also to, uh, have the creative challenge. Would be really exciting to have the creative challenge of um uh not having someone whose show it was to answer to, so that way I really get to try out the ideas. And naturally you'd still have like executives, and you still have an audience to answer to. But when everybody works on a show is there in service of the showrunner and creators conception. And so it'd be a pretty fun creative challenge to get to be the person that defines what those parameters are.
Right.
But I have a lot of ambition. I want to write movies. I want to write novels. I would love to get to do, like, my drawings are bad, but I'd love to get to do more drawing. Maybe do a web comic someday, like we were talking about.
I mean, sounds like you want to.
Yeah.
You were very excited about the idea of it.
Yeah, I love it.
Are you more
cool.
Are you more, because you worked in both adult and kids, are you more inclined to pitch or do kids or adults?
Well, the current thing that I'm going to bring around is a kid's idea, but I think I'm agnostic as to the demographic, and it's more a question of like, what's the idea? I feel like I'm very idea based. And if the idea is one that needs to have an adult audience in order to have its complete expression, then that's the road that idea has to go on. So I have ideas in both areas and things that I'm pitching in both areas.
Really cool.
I love writing for kids though. Like, it doesn't make as much sense business wise.
You think so?
Well, because adult usually is like Writers Guild versus Animation Guild.
Oh, sure,
right?
Sure.
It's exactly true. And also, even in some cases, in order to avoid doing the Writers Guild, what some producers of adult shows are doing is Writers Guild rates, not counting the residuals, but through tag. So even if it's through tag, sometimes you get a better rate.
Tag is the Animation Guild.
Yeah. Sorry, the Animation Guild.
Yeah,
sometimes even a show that's being done through the Animation Guild, you can get a better rate for it if it's intended for a grown-up audience, because it's dumb, but there's just precedent for paying better for writers.
Yeah.
Cool.
Very cool.
Well, that's the end of this creative block. Dani, thanks for being our guest and sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me on. I love the I gotta take a screenshot. I love what you guys have here. These drawings you guys did are amazing.
Oh, thank you. And also thanks to our listeners. Follow us on Twitter. It's at Creative Block, creative without the vowels, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask our guests. Huge thanks to our editor Clemens for editing the podcast, and Malik for helping us produce the show.
If you love our show, then support us on Patreon. Becoming a patron gets you early access to interviews as well as bonus episodes. Click the link in the description of this episode. I've been your host, Gene.
And I was B. Keep being creative, and we'll see you next week.
Bye!